Welcome back to the Football Fitness Federation podcast. This is episode 151. I'm delighted to be joined today by Head of Fitness and Conditioning at Bristol City, Patrick Orme. Patrick, how are you doing?
Hi, mate. You okay? Yeah, all good.
All good, mate. And I know you're away in a hotel at the moment, so we're hoping the signal's gonna stay strong. But cheers for coming on. I appreciate you giving up your time. I know you're coming on the podcast over catching up with a bit of extra kip, so I appreciate that. But do you want to start us off, mate? Head of Fitness and Conditioning at Bristol at the moment. But do you want to just take us through your journey, your career so far that's led you up to that point?
Yeah. So I started at John Moores University in Liverpool. So did my undergrad degree in sports science there. Probably quite lucky, really, that I had a really good university for sports science sort of on the doorstep, really. Because at that time I didn't know what I wanted to do. Sort of come out of college, got my A levels, and just sort of went for it to go and do the course there. But with a little bit of an open mind of where it was going to take me. I did the undergrad there. During the sort of second and third years. There was the general sort of placements that you get involved with undergrad degrees. So I did a little placement at Blackburn Rovers Academy, and another one at Macclesfield Town with their first team when they were sort of in League Two. So that sort of pushed me into the idea that I want to work in football. From there, wanted to stay on, did a master's at John Moores as well, so that was in sports physiology, and was quite lucky that alongside that I did a year-long internship at Everton. So that was really good, and obviously gave me a good opportunity to be in like a sort of elite environment, if you like, for the first time. It was a really good year for me to be able to sort of get a proper idea of where I wanted my career to go. Got to the end of that year again, sort of didn't know what I was going to do. Was a little bit sort of worried, if you like. I didn't know if I was ready to go and work full time in a club. And then the opportunity come up to go and work for Liverpool alongside doing my PhD still at John Moores. So obviously, as you would, jumped at the opportunity. Working day to day at probably one of the biggest clubs in the world was an opportunity that you can't turn down. And then for me personally, on top of that, the fact that I've followed Liverpool since I was a baby meant that it was just that little bit more special for me. So being able to do that and being able to sort of collect research from the first team players and be able to use that to put together a PhD thesis was an amazing opportunity. And then after finishing my 3 years there, I hadn't quite finished my PhD at that point, but it was time to move on from Liverpool. So I ended up coming down to Bristol, started off working within the 23s, and spent a couple of seasons doing that, whilst also putting the final touches to the PhD thesis. And then sort of it all tied in quite nicely that I finished my PhD, and in that summer I transitioned from under 23s up to the first team, and that's when I started doing this role, and I've been doing that ever since. So going into the third season now, and really enjoying it. So it's been good being down here.
Brill. And I'll just take you back to what you said at the very start of that, when you spoke about your first few experiences. So at Blackburn Academy, and then obviously Macclesfield being in the Football League at that time, League Two. What were the initial, because you mentioned that, and then you said obviously your intention was then to work in football. So what was the sort of attraction for you from getting those experiences, knowing that you want to work in it full time?
I think sort of prior to that, obviously I played football as a kid, and for me, like growing up sort of where I'm from, like everything was about football. Like it's your way of life sort of thing, if you like. And it was an easy decision to sort of want to be around that. But then I think, especially going into Blackburn, because they've got a brilliant setup there, probably back from the days where I think it was Kenny Dalglish who sort of put the wheels in motion for the training ground that they've got at the moment. It's sort of going in there because of their structure. It sort of showed me a little bit what jobs there were in football. because I think prior to that I didn't really know. I was doing my degree, and you've got an idea of the type of stuff that you're going to do as a sports scientist, but then actually seeing how that was done within a football club and how they were using the sort of tests or some of the tests that we were learning about as part of the course, and how they were sort of applying that. I think it was seeing that really sort of pushed me in the direction of where I wanted to be. I was quite lucky, like off the back of the placement. I went and sort of watched it was under 21s at the time. Went and watched their under 21s train a couple of times, and just watched what a lad called Matt Busby was doing with the 21s at the time, just seeing what his sort of like daily role was and the things he was doing with the GPS and the heart rate. Just sort of getting an idea of what jobs are basically out there. So it was really good in that sense to be able to just see where your degree could take you.
And then what about the first experiences at Macclesfield? Because obviously you're talking, I'm guessing, two very different experiences, but at the same time, two experiences where you probably take a lot from, can't you? Being first team environment, obviously, but Football League at that time, financial difficulties, or just before that point, possibly?
To be honest, I think it was just before, but even then, like you could see the difference in the two environments. I mean, you go to Blackburn's training ground, and it's like its own little village with it's like gated off and all the rest of it, and then you go to Macclesfield's training ground was something that they were using that was like a council building. That was effectively a leisure centre that with football pitches at the back that they were using as their training ground, and the sort of contrast in what they had was unbelievable. But then, I think it was one. I'm sure a lot of people do this, where I basically just sent out a load of emails, a load of letters to people at football clubs just to see if I could come in and have a look at what they were doing. And I think I sent something like 35 letters out or emails out, and I got one response off the assistant manager at Macclesfield, and he basically said, you can come in, see what you think, and help us out if you feel you can, because they didn't have anything in place, so they didn't have anyone. It was literally the manager, the assistant manager, a physio, and a kit man, and that was all they had at the time. So it was massively contrasting, and obviously just getting a feel for what can be done at that level to try and help when you've got very limited resources was eye-opening, to say the least.
But and just out of interest, do you get many of those type of letters now? So obviously being in your role in the Championship, like, is this what, because I speak to a lot of people that have been through that same process, getting clubs' addresses, trying to find someone at the club that you can write to. Like, just out of interest, do you receive those now?
Not as many as I thought I would, if I'm honest. I think one thing that we don't tend to have in Bristol is that it's not sort of the same as like in Liverpool. You've got John Moores University, and then you've got like the Premier League football clubs, obviously, because we haven't got a Premier League club, and we haven't got like a sports specific university right in the city. You don't. I think it might be because of that. I'm not really sure, but I mean, you get like a couple every now and again. But even I know you saw the studentships that we advertised in the off season. I know it was quite a short turnaround in terms of advertising through to the closing date and getting into interviews, but we didn't get as many applications as I thought we would have done, to be honest. And I think it surprised me a little bit, because I thought, for me, when I was a student, that was sort of the thing that needed to be done to be able to like sort of set the foundations while I was in university, to make sure that I would get opportunities when I did graduate and when I did move on and was looking for jobs. So surprisingly, not as many as I thought I would, to be honest.
It's interesting. We'll move it on to your role at Bristol now. So you mentioned before, obviously being there 3 years, so 3 pre-seasons. And obviously, as we're recording, we just started the season, so off the back of the pre-season period. So I thought it'd be good to start in that period and just talk about some of the potential differences that there've been across those pre-seasons, and also taken us into this year, and maybe some things that have been different this year as well?
Yeah. I mean, I know when we spoke the other day, I sort of mentioned this idea that sometimes you see people talk about when you work in football, it's the same year of experience, year after year after year. But definitely the last 3 years haven't been that, because my first year working with the first team was the season that got disrupted by COVID. So straight away, that was like nothing I'd ever seen before. It was, a really crazy time, a bit of a worrying time as well, because obviously there was a period where we didn't really know what was going to happen and whether like jobs were going to be safe and things like that. So yeah, it was very difficult in terms of pre-season that year. It was probably one of the best pre-seasons we could have had. We were quite lucky. We went over to the IMG Academy in Florida. Spent 2 weeks over there, which was brilliant. I mean, like the facilities there are literally like unbelievable. They're real top class. The interesting thing about that is that it actually probably affected the week when we come back, because one thing we weren't fortunate enough to do what some maybe the Premier League clubs do is we couldn't pay for our own flight over there with the amount of cost associated with that. So, traveling back on normal sort of a normal plane, the few days after we got back was a little bit disrupted because of like sort of jet lag, and when you've been away for 2 weeks, like trying to give the lads a little bit of time at home with the families as well, and not seen for a while. So yeah, that disrupted that last week a little bit. But all in all, I think that was a really good pre-season with an amazing trip in the middle to get some good work into the lads. Then the season after was that season where basically we come back, we played the remaining 6 games, had 2 weeks off, and then we were straight back into pre-season. There was so many limitations around what you could do in terms of the building that you could use, the groups that you could train in, who could be in contact with who, what type of drills you could do. It was very, very difficult. And I think the interesting thing, the thing that probably learned most from that pre-season was that we sort of made this assumption that because we had such a short period of time off in between the last game and starting pre-season back, we sort of thought, well, the lads aren't going to lose fitness that much in that time, and we can maybe not worry too much about the type of work that we're doing in pre-season. I think we probably got that wrong in hindsight looking back. I think we probably could have done more. We could have pushed on a little bit more, and we probably did underestimate how much conditioning they would lose in those couple of weeks that they had off.
Yeah.
So yeah, we definitely learned a lot from that, and I think that impacted a little bit on this pre-season that we've just finished now, along with obviously Food always 3 pre-seasons. It's been with a different manager each time, which has got its challenges as well, trying to adapt into the way that they want to train and the way they see things, especially like it can be stuff as simple as, some managers want the fitness work to be purely running without the ball, and it doesn't have to be specific whatsoever. It's just conditioning players. Whereas then you've got others who want to include the ball and everything. So yeah, adapting to that can be a bit of a challenge at times. But yeah, this pre-season's been brilliant. Again, it's had little bits of limitations to it in terms of like the last little bits of COVID. I think obviously with the with sort of Freedom Day, as it's being called, being stuck right in the middle of pre-season, it was as if like people felt that there had to be some restrictions before that date, so that it could be different afterwards. So it was a bit weird. But we obviously didn't leave the country. We stayed in the UK, went to Loughborough for a week, which interestingly, it doesn't sound as glamorous as going to IMG, but ultimately it was probably just as good because their facilities are at that same sort of level. And yeah, it was like an hour and a half, 2 hours on the bus rather than being a 10, 11 hour flight. So yeah, we had a brilliant time there. The other thing that we changed a little bit as well was we didn't play. We had a little bit of a longer period before we started playing games. So that just gave us a little bit more control over what we could do in training, not having to worry too much about the exposure to matches early on, which I think that worked really well. And I think the last thing that I found quite interesting is that, and I think again, it's probably a little bit of a hangover from the COVID period, is that you know, a lot of teams seem to have been playing games at the training ground rather than playing at the stadium, which we've found, particularly with moving into the new building recently, it was, you know, a massive advantage for us because, you know, even when lads weren't playing full games, we could get them as soon as they were coming off the pitch, they're going straight in and getting themselves into the gym, and we're getting a little bit of a strength stimulus into them as well, but in a proper environment rather than trying to do it at the side of a pitch where you haven't really got the equipment that you need. So, yeah, I think it'll be interesting next season to see what happens with that because, yeah, I think if you speak to a few people, I'd imagine there'll be quite a few who'd actually look back and say they quite liked having that opportunity to play those games at the training ground rather than being at a stadium.
Yeah, definitely. It's really interesting, isn't it, that preseason period? Because like you say, with the restrictions, especially like travel restrictions, I suppose it just makes you reassess the reasons for going to these places abroad, doesn't it? And if you can get that same work over here, obviously you're removing a big chunk of travel time, but then at the same time being in facilities like that over there and getting the weather and all the facilities and the lads going away together and all that sort of stuff. It's a tough one, isn't it? Because I'm guessing there's positives to both sides. But then into the games program as well. I know Frankie spoke about this on her episode, but it's interesting that behind closed doors setup, isn't it, at the training ground? Because like you say, you've got a little bit more control over what you can do with the players after games and things like that as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's interesting like what you said then about, you know, why do we sort of go away? I think, you know, we're looking back now saying that the Loughborough trip's brilliant, but if the weather hadn't, we had brilliant weather. It was that 1 week of good weather that we had in the middle of July. So yeah, it was brilliant. But if we'd have been there and it had been raining every day, I think we might have come back with a little bit of a different review.
Yeah.
So yeah, I know it seems like it was a good trip, but yeah, it could have easily been turned on its head. But yeah, I think what you're saying about the games there, yeah, I think the more control you can have over things in pre-season, the better, because ultimately you always get that feeling when, I don't know, it's usually sometime between the start of the last week of pre-season leading into your first game, or sometime in the first couple of weeks of the season, where you start to feel that you're losing control a little bit because the games are taking over and there's not as much that you can control. And obviously everyone likes to control the controllables. So once that gets taken away from you a little bit, I think it's a little bit uncomfortable. So when you've got the opportunity to do that in pre-season, it's something that I think we should try and make the most of if you've got the opportunity to do it.
Because there's a lot of other factors that come into it as well, isn't there? So like that control side of things from your role, or people that are in similar roles, you do want to control it, but then there's factors with the club maybe having to go to certain places for sponsors and all the rest of it. There's the managers' point of views and the way that they work. Like you mentioned before, like different managers work in different ways, don't they? They might have gone to places before that they want to go back to. So there's a lot of other factors, isn't it, rather than you just sitting down and saying this is what we should do. And I suppose that's where it becomes your skill as a practitioner to find that middle ground, isn't it, of getting what you want to get from that period and then what everyone else wants to get out of that period as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think like one of the things we've sort of spoke about a lot recently, sort of being adaptable, and ultimately like to be able to sort of be good at a role within a football club. I think as long as you can adapt to stuff, you generally speaking, you'll be all right. If you can't and you're very stringent in the way that you want to be, I think you find it quite difficult. And you know, that stuff you've just been talking about there, sometimes there are things that are fully out of your control, and you do have to find a way to adapt to it and make sure you can make the best out of whatever situation that you're sort of handed, really.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think you mentioned before briefly about the new facility, which I think is, like, I've seen, obviously not been, but I've seen clips, videos, little pictures and stuff, and it looks incredible. And I know there's been a lot of planning going into it, and changes since it's opened as well. So I think it'd be great to sort of delve into initially the planning and maybe some considerations that you made from your, again, because I know there's a lot of decision makers in the process, but from your viewpoint and your role, some initial considerations that you maybe put towards in the planning process?
Yeah, I mean, we were quite lucky in the sense that we had a lad called Sam Morse who was he sort of took responsibility for the whole planning of the building, and then saw through the sort of the build process all the way through to completion. And I say we were lucky because he was actually a member of staff at the club, so he was in the training ground day to day in the older buildings that we had. So he was always around, and I think having that sort of like day-to-day contact with someone where you could be sat at your desk and you could literally just come over and say, Pad, what do you think about this? Or do you need this? Or do you need that? Allowed that process to be quite, I don't know, smooth the right word, but probably, yeah, it made it a lot better in terms of you wouldn't go for months at a time without thinking about the training ground, and then all of a sudden someone's got 300 things that you want me to make decisions on, and you can't quite process them, because then you could talk about like little bits at a time. So one of the things that we had a big say over was obviously the gym and how we were set up down there. And yeah, I mean, the way that he was able to sort of get like visual, like software on his laptop where you could like visually put together what the actual gym would look like, and there'd be like, it was a bit like a Sims effectively, where like there'd be like little bikes in where the bikes were going to be, and there'd be like little racks, and it was unbelievable. So we were able to plan that area quite well. I think we'll come on to the changes a little bit in a minute, where obviously it always does adapt. But yeah, the opportunity to be involved in planning something like that, and then seeing it through to actually getting the opportunity to be in the building and getting to work in there, it's been it's been really good.
Yeah, because I suppose the thing with not having someone around all the time that is taking charge of that planning process is, like you said, those 300 things that crop up end up being an email, don't they? Or a number of different emails, whereas it can be a 2-minute conversation. And I suppose there's a lesson to be learned in that, isn't there? Not just in planning something like a training ground, but just in any role, full stop, that the communication between any staff members is crucial, isn't it, to make it effective like that?
Yeah, 100%. I think we were quite lucky as well that Sam, funnily enough, I think his undergrad degree was actually in sports science.
Oh,
so he had a little bit of an understanding of where we were coming from. So like he sort of knew what questions to come and ask us. He knew what sort of things would affect like my role and the way that we work. Whereas if it was with someone who was planning it, who maybe works for a building company, they might not have understood the similar sort of things and might have thought, oh, that doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
And then that ultimately over time becomes a bigger issue. So yeah, it was a good situation, the way that that sort of panned out for us, to be honest.
And I know we can sort of delve into some of the changes that you made since like using the facility, which is always going to be the case, isn't it? Like you can set out plans, but plans have to change. But what were, and you can maybe tie this in with the same sort of thing, but in terms of the actual planning of the gym in particular, what were some key considerations or key things that you wanted in place? It might be putting certain things in certain places because you can visualize how a session is going to run and how groups are going to move around or individuals move around. And then also taking that into maybe some of the changes that you made since when the players have actually got in there and started working.
Yeah, I mean, we initially the gym that we had on the old site, it was okay. It was like, you know, I'm sure like there's clubs that have to deal with a lot worse than what we had. But one of the things that we wanted was more space.
Yeah.
So we wanted like a bigger area, because what we were finding that like on a day where we wanted to get the full squad in, maybe on like on a -3 or a -4 to get them in for a session altogether, the area wasn't really big enough. So we wanted a little bit more room so that we could get the group in all at once and be able to still sort of have breathing space effectively. So that was one of the big things, sort of like having space in between the racks, making sure we had enough racks, Yeah, and then really just having enough equipment to be able for players to be doing the same exercise at the same time, rather than everyone waiting for one bit of kit. Then we had sort of like an area on the other side of the gym that was where we had all the bikes, and in front of that we've got a big screen that drops down. So while the lads, especially in the Championship, you spend a lot of time with lads on recovery days in between games, we were trying to foresee that we'd use that opportunity where they might be doing like a spin on the bike, but at the same time they could have the clips on the screen from the game that the analysts put together, so that you can utilize that time for more than just one thing. And it sort of takes away from, if you think that, I think we play, obviously got a midweek game this week. We had a midweek game last week. Those short turnarounds, like, they rack up quite a lot, and you play a lot of midweek games over the course of a season. The amount of times you've got lads that are doing a bike-based recovery session. If you're just asking them to spin on the bike for 20 minutes every other day, they're going to get to a point where they're so bored of it that they don't want to do it anymore. Whereas if you can find like sort of ways to like sort of stimulate the mind a little bit while that's happening, you've got an opportunity to keep them a little bit more bought into the process. But yeah, I think we've in terms of the space in the gym, I think we actually got to a point where we probably overfilled it a little bit. So we got a bit carried away and bought maybe too much equipment, too many things that we maybe didn't need. So yeah, some of the transition so far has just been to try and create that space again. So you've got like areas to actually work in and not worry too much about having every little bit of kit under the sun that you probably could get away with not really needing. So that's probably been the biggest change in the gym. And then in terms of other changes, really, I think the big one for us has been that we sort of made a decision during pre-season that we wanted to change how we approach home games. So instead of lads arriving to what we used to do is lads would arrive to the stadium, we'd have pre-match at the stadium, and then they'd sort of hang around in the stadium for a bit before they go down to the changing rooms, and then the normal sort of game process would start from there. We decided, well, why don't we come up to the training ground, have pre-match at the training ground, and then use that space that we've now got up there as an area for them to sort of either chill out and relax, or we've got a pool table, we've got like little like games and stuff like that they can use to sort of fill the time, so that they're not worrying about the game. So they've got a little bit of time to like sort of decompress, if you like, and be relaxed before they get to that point where we say, right, now is the time where we have a meeting before we leave to go down to the stadium, and it's like, right, now we're into game mode. But in that time earlier, they're not worrying and like getting nervous energy and starting to get uptight about the game too early. So yeah, we sort of changed a few things around at the training ground to be able to accommodate for that. So we've got like a little area now where the lads have got their own little space to be able to go and relax and have a chat and watch the TV, whatever it might be. So yeah, we've changed a few bits around for that, really. That's probably been the biggest thing that we've changed so far.
No, that's interesting, because when we were chatting on the phone, when we were talking through this sort of stuff, I actually realized that we've never really touched on anything around like match day. So I think it's really interesting going into that, because when you get into that period, and you used a phrase, I think, when we were on the phone, I can't quite remember what it was, and see if you can remember, but around basically that's the time you're making or breaking, isn't it? That's the time that it's crunch time, because it's time to perform. All your work essentially behind the scenes has been done. But if the players are in the wrong state physically or wrong state of mind at that point, obviously that's going to transfer to the game. So I thought it'd be good to just dive into just extend that onto your role or your responsibilities when we get to the stadium and when the match starts, essentially, because like we've talked a lot, and I know a majority of work is done before that point, isn't it? But I think this is also a crucial time. Obviously, this is when performance and results come, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can remember what we were talking about. I can't remember what I said. I think it was basically something along the lines of like that time is probably the period that has the biggest impact on the performance, because the longer before away from the game, you've got that opportunity. If you make a mistake on 4 days away from the game, you can maybe take a day off the next day and reset and give the lads time to recover. You make a mistake like the morning of a game, there's not long for you to be able to rectify the issue. So yeah, I think game day for me, it's like, I'll be completely honest, don't do a great deal, especially before the game. But it is a really important time in terms of those last little bits to make sure that the players feel like they're fully ready to go. The big thing for me when we arrive at games is probably preparing the changing room so that everything's in there that the lads need. So like, mainly from a nutrition perspective, we're quite lucky that we've got quite a big group of staff. So the soft tissue therapists bring a lot of the sort of stuff like foam rollers and bands that the lads use for their own like little pre-warm-up stuff. And then I focus more on making sure that the right sort of nutrition bits are in the changing room for those like last little bits before we start the warm-up. But yeah, then from there, it's pretty much getting the lads out, doing the warm-up, first part of it, trying to make that as sort of lively as possible, really. I think it's something that I've sort of thought about a fair bit, where like, I'm probably quite nosy. We tend to go out quite early in comparison to other teams. So usually by the time I've finished doing my bit, the other team usually comes out around about then. So I'm always a little bit nosy and watching what other people do, and it intrigues me that sometimes you see things that I sort of think, I'd probably do that earlier in the week.
Yeah.
And on the game day, for me, it's just a case of get them warm, get them ready, and let them go. Like, I don't think it's not the time to be worrying too much about like sort of correcting movements and things like that. Like ultimately, if it's not right by now, it isn't going to be right in the next 10 minutes before they start the game. So yeah, I think I try and keep that as sort of simple as possible, really, and just get them sort of fired up and ready to go, and then let them go and do the bit they need to do with the coaches before the game starts. In terms of during the game, it's just a case of being around. It sounds a little bit of like a bit part, and I suppose it is really, like when the whistle goes, it becomes about the players, really. They're the ones that are performing, and we're effectively just watching the game and making sure that if they need anything, you've got everything ready to go, whether that's like, hopefully you get to a point where you don't need to be throwing gels on into games, but that we've got that sort of support if players need it. And then I think from there, it's probably the post-match stuff where it becomes the busiest part of the day. So as soon as the game finishes, that sort of window, as soon as the lads who've played the game come off, you've got that like window of opportunity to make sure that we're getting the right nutrition into them to start that recovery process off. So, as soon as the manager finishes talking, I'm trying to get round the changing room and trying to give the lads what we can to make sure we sort of kickstart that recovery process. And I'm usually trying to do that pretty quickly, because as soon as I've done that, I'm then taking the subs back out to go and do their the post-match work with them to make sure that they keep topped up and ready to go. So that's usually like, we'll take the ones who play less than 45 minutes usually, we'll take them back out. And it'll depend a little bit on what the training week looks like, when we're training next, when the next game is, where that player's up to in terms of, has he done a lot of something and not a lot of something else, or vice versa. But yeah, usually a combination of some sort of like longer strides, some sort of shorter change of direction type stuff, and then maybe a bit of exposure to max speed, depending on when they last got an exposure to that. And then once we've done that, back inside again, and that's when we start the little bit of strength work to try and keep a bit of a stimulus into them with that as well. And yeah, that's pretty much it on a match day.
Yeah, well, I know you said before that your role is sort of minimal on a match day, but I think a lot of it comes down to protecting the player's energy, doesn't it? And making sure that sort of psychologically and physically that they're ready. And whether that is physically preparing gels or drinks or whatever it is within the changing room environment, or whether it is any interaction that you're having with the player. Because obviously you're going to speak to players at that point, and that interaction needs to be positive towards the performance, doesn't it? Or is it a case of taking their mind? I suppose this comes down to the individual. Is it a case of taking their mind away from it and just trying to speak about other things, I suppose, with certain people. But that's when it comes down to knowing your players, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the changing rooms are a really interesting environment, and I think a lot of people think they want to be in there and think they want to be part of it because it feels like that's the area where it's happening. It's like it's seen as this like behind the scenes, you're really in the thick of it if you're in the changing room. And don't get me wrong, like after you've won a game, you get 3 points on a Saturday and you're in there at 5 o'clock. It's brilliant. It's a really really sort of unique experience. But on the flip side of that, it can also be a really horrible place to be. And you take the rough with the smooth. I think one of the important things when it comes to being around the change room on a match day is probably reading the situation and reading the room and sort of understanding when's the right time to be in there and being proactive and trying to help the lads like refuel a little bit at half time or whatever it might be. And then when's the time to take a step back and just keep yourself out of the way because something else is the priority at that moment in time. So I think that's the big thing for me when you're sort of around match day, is sort of having that understanding of sort of knowing your place and knowing when it's time to be on the front foot and when it's time to be in the background.
Yeah, I suppose that's going to change all the time, isn't it? And that's when we spoke about being able to adapt before. Like, this is the ultimate sort of time that you have to use that skill, isn't it? Because that is going to change probably every single game throughout the season in terms of, yes, you've not got the most roles to do on a match day, but there's times where you do need to act and times that you don't, and you need to know, you need to learn quickly when those are.
Yeah, definitely. It's a fine line for sure. It's definitely a fine line between the two. Yeah.
And then the other thing is we've got to remember that we're there to support the coaches and the players, aren't we? So it's having that in mind all the time. And it means that you don't have to be front and center all the time. There could be jobs that you do that probably don't get noticed, but do go to a long way to helping performance on the field, whether it's individuals or whether it's a team.
Yeah, I think that's one for me that, like, some of the stuff that you do, it's not the most glamorous, and it's definitely not maybe appreciated as much as you'd like it to be. But one thing's for sure, if you get it wrong or you forget to do it or it's missing, then it'll become noticed straight away. And I suppose it's like it's like a thankless task, if you like. But what one thing that I've sort of always tried to maintain and sort of, I suppose, pride myself on through my career so far is trying to make sure that you don't miss those things. So there's like always a consistency of, if something's there and there's a job that's being done once on one game, it's the same for every single game. Yeah. A lot of players do like having consistency around them. They can't cope with something changing on a match day, and it can be something as simple as like the socks that they wear or something like that can be different, and that can completely set them off onto a downward spiral mentally where they're not prepared to play the game, all the way through to you forget to bring water with you. You forget the water, like you've got a bit of a problem. So I think it's an interesting environment for sure.
Yeah, and that's what I mean by protecting their energy, because it can go positive and negatively, can't it? And it sums it up with where you guys are right now. Obviously, staying in hotels. Hotels are going to change all the time. You're going to be in different places, playing away from home, and then it's just maintaining as much consistency. And again, taking back that control as much as you can, isn't it? Whether you're in Reading, whether you're in wherever it is, it does matter, but it's your job and the staff's job then to try and keep it as consistent as possible to put the players in the right headspace, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing that, I mean, we're quite, I think I've said this a few times, that we're quite lucky. I do feel like the way that we're set up, we are fortunate, both me individually, the support I get for my role from other members of staff around me, but the support that the players get, the amount of stuff that's done behind the scenes to make sure that consistency is maintained. Our kit man Scotty, the amount of stuff that he takes on the back of his van and unloads on his own, so that everything's in the changing room ready to go. it's like, it's unbelievable. I mean, we when we went to Middlesbrough last week, and the amount of stuff we took with us, it looked like we were staying up there for a couple of weeks. And it was literally for one game. So yeah, the work that like people like him put in behind the scenes to make sure we maintain that consistency is it's really up there. Like,
yeah, class. Now, I think it's interesting touching on that, because it's something that we haven't touched on the podcast before. And I know there's a lot of other work that goes on throughout the week, but it's also a crucial time. And it's essentially the time where points are picked up or lost, isn't it? So it's crunch time.
Yeah.
But I thought it'd be good as well just to go into, you mentioned a little bit about post-match before, about getting the strength work in, but also the analysis. So how you guys are approaching that. And I know you've got a few different ways you're going about that with the players after the game, from game analysis.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm going to use my favourite word again. We're quite lucky that we get to use we use TrackApp. So our lads don't wear GPS in games. We get our physical data from the camera-based system that they provide. So yeah, I mean, we get that data live. So I can get that on an iPad as the game's going on. It's not something that we tend to use that often, just because I think, like we were saying before, about knowing when's the right time to sort of be at the forefront and when's the right time to be in the background when you're in the changing room. I think it's the same sort of thing in general on a match day. And personally, for me, I think once the game is happening, it's down to the manager whether he wants to make a decision or not. And if he wants to ask my opinion, then obviously I'm there to provide that. But I don't think, with the amount of things that we go on in his head at that moment in time, it's not for me to go and sort of push things on him. Ultimately, it comes down to his decision making. So we do have that data live, but we don't really use it that often. What we tend to use it more for is the next morning we'll sort of get a couple of raw data files through from TrackApp, and just the process of putting that into different reports to be able to show the players. So we sort of show them what they've done, just at a very sort of basic level, what they've done in the game from the sort of general perspective of like total distance, meters per minute, the higher speed running brackets. And then we show that in comparison to what they normally do in a 90-minute game. And then we split it up into like 15-minute splits. We show us versus the opposition, and we show us in possession to us out of possession. So yeah, it's putting together that sort of like report package, if you like, that we show to the players, show to the manager, show to the coaches. And yeah, trying to get an understanding from that data of where we might be in comparison to where we'd normally be following a game. So especially when we've got these sort of like quick turnarounds into another game coming around quick and fast sort of thing, getting an idea of whether we think there's any individuals within the squad who might need a little bit extra in terms of some recovery modalities, whether it could be something as simple as a little bit of extra work with the soft tissue therapists, or a little bit longer rest off the feet, a little bit less in training, all the way through to altering the nutrition that they're getting into the body to try and help that process speed up as much as possible, because sometimes we haven't got the time to be able to let it like flow through at the body's like natural rate of recovery.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's interesting at the moment. It's something that I know it's getting quite a lot of attention in terms of like social media, with like the context around like sort of match data. Mm-hmm. So it's something that I am looking at a little bit, because I'm fully aware of the fact that distances on their own don't necessarily paint the whole picture. And yeah, we're sort of trying to look at now. One of the things we do get from TrackApp is we get like a raw data file that gives you sort of coordinates of each data point for each player during the game, and trying to find ways of using that raw data to give more of a picture of what the players have actually done in the game. So yeah, a little bit of a work in progress at the moment, but yeah, that's sort of where we're at with that side of things at the moment.
And is that the sort of thing that you mentioned before about in the new facility on the bikes with the screen? Is that the sort of time that you'd present that back to players in that recovery session?
Yeah, so we try and send it to them generally through like WhatsApp. One of the things we've pushed quite a lot this year is trying to sort of give them more access to the data and get them to understand a little bit more what they're doing, and why they're doing it. And it's worked really well in pre-season because I think showing them the sort of like the physical outcomes, if you like, from the training that we were doing, made them sort of understand why we were asking them to do it, because obviously it is hard. It's very, very tough for them. But then when they can sit down and go, all right, yeah, I understand now why we had to do that session.
Yeah.
I think it allows them then to be more sort of bought into that process. And it's something that we're trying to sort of carry through now into the season. So yeah, we try and give them that data as early as possible following the game. And then yeah, we'll generally we've got one of the things we've got on the training ground, we've got a lot of screens. So there's TV screens everywhere. And we try and utilize them as much as possible to put that type of information on there. So always the first time we're in after a game, we'll always drop the big screen down in the gym and put some data from the game on there. And more than anything, it's just to try and start conversations with them.
Yeah.
So it might not be that data is like the be all and end all, but it does start a conversation where a player might come over and say, how come my numbers are so much higher? I don't feel tired. I don't feel like I did anything. And then you can start a conversation with them around, well, yeah, your high speed running's higher because do you remember what the game was like for the 10 minutes that you played? Yeah. It was like end to end, and you're literally up and down, but because you've only played 10 minutes, but yeah, you're not going to feel particularly tired. And I think it gets them a little bit more bought into the process of understanding sort of why we're there and what we're trying to help them with, which so far has been really positive for us.
Yeah, I suppose that's then when you apply that or give information on the context, isn't it? So when you're talking about making everything contextual, like you're giving the data to, and again, it comes down to communication, but then you're able to add that extra bit of information, and players will answer their own questions at that point as well, won't they? Like if you just guide them in a time like that, they'll understand that if they reflect on the game and what it was like, they'll probably be able to answer everything that they're going to ask anyway.
Yeah, I think like we've got a really good group, and I know like most people probably say that now. Like I think players are becoming more aware of what's going on, what's going into training, because I think it's probably it's not enough anymore to just turn up, and unless you're unbelievably talented, like it's not enough for you to just turn up and just sort of do your thing and go on. You do have to buy into the fact that the speed of the game and the demands of each, like if you think about the demands of each individual game from a physical perspective, before you even think about adding that up over a 38 or 46 game season, the sort of the demand on the body is so big now that players have to sort of buy into this idea that you're going to have to do some sort of work to try and keep yourself on the pitch as much as possible. Yeah. It's unlikely that you're going to be able to just rock up and play every single game. Obviously, you're going to have a few who are genetically blessed to be able to do that, but a lot of lads are going to have to work quite hard to be able to maintain the bodies to a point that they can stay in and operate at that intensity over the course of the season. And I think that generally speaking, from my experience with our group, they've bought into that quite well and are sort of understanding the benefits that they're getting from that, which is great, because ultimately then they get the most out of it and it makes our job a lot easier. Yeah,
brilliant. We'll move things on, mate, because I want to get onto some of the quick fire questions that we finished the podcast with. So first one being, who are some of the biggest influences on your career so far?
I think biggest one so far is probably Barry Just. Quite an easy one really to drop in because he was my director of studies for my PhD. So I've known Baz for probably about 8 years now, something like that. And yeah, I mean, the help that he gave me during that time of getting through the process of completing a PhD was unbelievable. I mean, you know, I speak to so many people who've done PhDs, and they get so frustrated with the supervisory team because, you know, they email them and they get an email back 2 weeks later. And then, you know, I class myself as really fortunate to have been able to have him where, like, you know, like Sunday nights at 10:30, we'd be sat around talking about what a chapter looks like or something like that. He's unbelievably committed, and anyone who gets him to be their supervisor is really, really fortunate. So yeah, he's had a massive effect. And then I think beyond that, I've been quite lucky. I've worked with quite a few really good practitioners, to be honest. One big one, Jordan Milson, who's up at Rangers now. I think for me, he just seems to work. Like, he thinks in a different way. So he's always trying to think about what the next thing is. And I think, you know, even this morning on the way over here, I was talking to someone about our like sort of rehab sessions and stuff like that, and the way that, for me personally, to see how he used to go about planning like end stage rehab, like the detail that he used to go to, and the things that he used to think about. He was top class, and he really made sort of challenge me to be the best that you can. And then other than that, the other two would probably be Liam Anderson, who's been on with you. I think he was on a few months ago, wasn't he? Yeah. Me and Liam obviously went through similar sort of process from John Moores all the way through to Liverpool together. And then another lad called Del Bonsu, who's our head of S&C at Bristol City. I think with those two, really, they've had a massive influence on my career, but probably more because, first and foremost, I classed them as really good friends. And I think having someone that you sort of work with and work alongside, who you're able to bounce things off and have conversations about when things are going well and when things aren't going well, it's been a really important thing for me, because it is hard at times. Like, you know, it can be quite a relentless industry. So having someone that close alongside you to be able to sort of get you through things has been like, it's been a massive influence on me.
Brilliant. Liverpool well represented there amongst them as well, aren't they? Yeah. Next one. What would you say your biggest strength is as a practitioner?
I'm not one for blowing my own trumpet, to be honest. But
what would what do you think the players would say? Oh, maybe we shouldn't ask that.
One thing for sure is I would not ask them. Probably pitch-based stuff. So a lot of my work's done on the pitch, really. I've always sort of, probably going back again to the days of being at Liverpool, working with Ryland Morgans, he was really, really good on the pitch. Like the way he used to deliver to the players, it was something that I was looked up to and thought that was the way that I wanted to be able to interact with them. And I think it's the epitome of being applied for me, was that sort of that bit where you're out and you're delivering on the pitch. So I think it'd probably be that. I think it allows you to integrate better with the coaches as well, so, and the other staff there at the club. I think that being involved in that sort of process around training and when you're outside on the grass is definitely the best place for me, I think. Yeah.
Class. And then last one, I always ask this one just because I think it's nice to direct coaches onto where you've focused your sort of energy at the moment in terms of CPD. So not necessarily just in terms of courses, but just in terms of anything that you've maybe read articles, listened to podcasts, it might be on certain websites. Is there anything that you've sort of seen, done recently that you feel has maybe questioned your practice or added to what you're doing?
I knew you were going to ask me this one. And when I thought about it, I thought I've probably not done as much as I should have done. It made me think that you sort of get tied down into the day-to-day of work, and you probably don't do as much, or I don't do as much as I should do, really. But I think one of the things that I've probably done most is listening to the podcasts. So just picking up on just from flicking through Twitter, really. Like obviously when like you put out the tweets and that of people that you see and think, oh, I'd be interested to hear what he's got to say. So yeah, like listening to podcasts is probably one of the more direct ones that I do, really. But then I think, and it probably ties in a little bit with something that when we were speaking about, obviously you guys getting the in-person meetings up and running again. I think for me, one of the big things has been, so Dave Rennie started with us the sort of like start of pre-season, really, like in the off season is probably when he first come in, and just sort of being around someone who's had that much experience and being able to just sort of chat to them day to day. I think in a weird sort of way, that's like being like my CPD, really, where like you can sort of bounce your ideas off someone who, you know, he's seen quite a lot, and you can then get an idea of, all right, I might not know 100% whether this is going to work or not, but he might have seen it before, and he might be able to give you a little bit of advice. And ultimately, that is what makes you develop. So I think for me, it'd definitely be getting that opportunity to go out and sort of speak to people again. That's not, I know we're doing it now through a Zoom call, but you know, I don't think you can replace that sort of like in-person interaction of just speaking to someone else who's maybe been through what you've been through, or what you're going through, and speaking to them. It's something that I've tried to, like, at games, when we've been playing games so far this pre-season, just been trying to like talk to people at opposition clubs and stuff like that, and just see how things have been going with them, and maybe they've done something a little bit different to us, which it sounds like a bit of a weird CPD, but for me, I think it's been really really important, and I've probably learned quite a lot from it.
I think that's the one where people take the most from, though. Like you say, it doesn't have to be a course or anything like that. I think loads of people have mentioned conversations or certain people that they've been sort of picking the brains from. And you know that when you have those conversations, you'll take absolutely loads from it. And I spoke to a few people recently where they've said, like, people at that same club, sometimes you don't even have to go out of your own training ground to be able to have conversations with people you're going to take loads from. So when I ask that, I don't always mean specific like courses and things. I think the conversations you can have with people, like, I fully agree. I think it's so beneficial. And the more of those types of conversations, the better, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think like when you go on a course, generally speaking, they're trying to tell you the way to do something. I know it's quite a generalization, but it's like, this is the way to do something. Whereas when you speak to a person through experience, usually experience is based off when they've got it wrong.
Yeah.
And understanding the mistakes. And the reality is that we're all making mistakes. No one's got the perfect answer. Obviously, we had a really tough season last year, and we probably made quite a lot of mistakes. Whereas, you know, we had the season before where we had a really good year, and we probably still made mistakes, but we just they didn't come to light. We didn't realize what they were when they were happening. So I think, it's always really interesting to speak to other people and see from their experience what you can sort of avoid more than anything else, to try and limit the amount of mistakes you make. And then I think in the long run, you probably improve your own performance and the performance of your team just by limiting the mistakes, rather than actually having to make anything better in a weird sort of way.
Yeah, no, I agree. I fully agree. Mate, that was brilliant. Really, really good. I think we've got through loads there. I think it was interesting to cover the match day stuff because it's something that we're not spoke about too much before, but then the facility as well. Again, I'm sure many people will be sitting back being jealous about a new facility, but it's interesting, isn't it, that all these plans go into these facilities and it comes back to you just wanting the room and the space to work with the players. And just, if anyone wants to reach out to you, is the best place, where is the best place? Is it social media? Where would you direct them?
Yeah, probably on Twitter.
And that's just your name, isn't it? With no dots or anything?
Yeah, just at Patrick Orme, I try to stay on top of Twitter, really. I think, it's quite a powerful tool for obviously communicating with other people. So, yeah, probably through there, to be honest.
Perfect, mate. Well, I really appreciate you coming on, and you can go and get a bit of rest now before the game tonight, and best of luck in it and for the rest of the season. And cheers for coming on. We'll stay in touch.
yeah, thanks a lot for having me on, mate. Really appreciate it.